How leaders beat the 70% failure rate in change initiatives. Tracey is the founder of the Virtue Effect Leadership. From her 20 plus years of growing SaaS, e-com, and professional services businesses, Tracey shares how she's used unconventional feedback loops to drive rapid growth and change initiatives that actually stick. Dan Humbert is the senior account executive at Y Meadows. He is very involved in having active conversations with all of our community members. He has a wide experience, a lot of experience in this realm too. So I'm actually going to turn the time over to both of you. Everyone, this is applause in sign language. So if you would welcome Tracey and Dan with us to kick us off and start the conversation about successful change initiatives. Over to you folks.
Brilliant. Paul, okay, thank you. Can you hear me okay? And Tracey,
Absolutely.
more important, can you hear me okay?
I can hear you.
Okay, great. Tracey and I've had a chance to talk about these a couple of times, and it's always interesting what comes up. So the conversation is always new and different every time. So I'm kind of looking forward to seeing where we're going to start with. That chat that Paul's kind of started off was great. It was hitting a whole bunch of things I think that Tracey, you and your leadership experience and the teams you worked with have dealt with before. Things like evolving operating models, things are changing, cross-function. I heard that cross-functional alignment, that was an important one. Somewhere about buy-in and executive buy-in. We don't always have full executive buy-in.
Right, buy-in top and bottom. I saw that one too. Mm-hmm.
So the statistic that you and I bounced back and forth and talked about at one point via email was that McKinsey study that talks about, it's early in the year, right? We're beginning of 2026, lots of change initiatives, and McKinsey comes out and throws that nice wet blanket. It says 70% of change initiatives fail. So I guess the way I want to start off with you is you've been through it. You've had the successes and the hard knocks. What do you suggest we do to keep in that 30% that actually make it?
Yeah, it's tough, right? You look at the barriers that you need to go through. And I loved what everybody was saying in the chat. Like so many of those things are all elements of what you need. And what I found over the years, there's really two pieces to think about. Is one, how do you figure out what to change? And second, how do you have it adopted? All right. So the two, and
Well,
again,
I want to follow up on that real quickly because I think that one of the comments that when I think about that is like nobody minds change, but nobody likes being changed, right? So it seems like that's right in line with that concept.
right. Change is fine if it's your ideas, not somebody else's.
So where do we begin?
Well, I think, let's actually take that for what it is. If it's your idea, you're more interested in doing the change and adopting the change. And so when we've looked at changes for the organization I've worked for, the most successful ones were when we asked frontline people, what do we need to change? Right? The people who are closest to the customers, the ones who are working with them, who are dealing with their problems, who are going through the struggles, they're going to know where the pain points are for the customers first. Not just, oh yeah, we've got a great idea. We're going to, put in this new product or this new features, and customers are like, I don't care. Could you fix this one that isn't working? Right? And so one of the things that, we did, to give you an example, our frontline they take phone calls. So it was GovTech software as a service, right? So they like to call in when they need help. They don't do chat as much as other software. So they're calling in, and one of the frontline workers that I was chatting with in the hall looked so frustrated, and I said, what's going on? And she says, nobody's listening to me, but at least a third of the calls I take are for password reset. She goes, could we not just put the little eyeball thing next to password so people could see what it is?
Like when you have to type it in twice, kind of
right.
thing? Like,
you have the eyeball come up, and I'm like, well, have you told, the product team? She goes, nobody cares. I'm the front line. So it didn't matter what she was saying. And when we looked at it, I said, well, let's go talk to the product people and find out, well, what do they need in order to listen? And they needed better data. But she didn't have access to the data. So we figured out a way to start categorizing the phone calls and being able to notice which are the ones that are related to the password and so forth. And then when we had just a week's worth of data, it was actually about 40% of the calls that were coming in were on this password reset for this, one time.
So she was onto something. She had a gut, but now you add the data behind it to kind of say, this is a real thing. Let's go fix this.
Right. And so, through this process, we were able to convince the product people to put that eyeball in. And then the next week we measured again, and case volume rate dropped by 30%. And which was great because they were underwater on their, they couldn't handle all the calls that were coming in. So this was a really big deal for all the customers overall. But it's a good example of, how do you figure out what to change? And because it was such a struggle for a lot of the people in the front line, they had an easy way to adopt it because they're like, hey, they're listening to us now. It's our idea that's getting implemented. We'll support it. We'll do documentation, like whatever you need. But when you've got other initiatives, right? How do you get people to adopt a change? Right? And it's not just about the 30% of initiatives that fail, but there's another study I read from October of last year where they interviewed like 1,400 business people, and 33% of those people said that their voice mattered in a change. So think about
33,
it.
so
33
less
said
a small,
33
yeah, a
said I
minority.
matter. The opposite, 67% of people said my voice doesn't matter. Well, if your voice doesn't matter, why would you adopt a change?
That's the being changed, right? That's the I'm being changed, as opposed to I'm part of the change.
Correct, correct. And so one of the things that, knowing this, like if you don't matter, how do you have people feel like I see you, I hear what's going on with you, and you matter to me? And if you can do that, you know what? Before I jump into this, everybody on the call, take a moment and just think for a second. Don't answer out loud, don't put it in the chat, just, unfiltered in your head where you can be raw and honest. Does your team feel like you hear them? Does your team feel like you see them? Like really see them, what's going on for them? And do they know that they matter to you? Do they matter to you? When I first joined NeoGov, which was the GovTech SaaS company that I want to use an example from, my answers to those questions were actually no. And so I needed to change those from a no to a yes, because that's how change gets adopted. And that's how people can be part of what's being changed. And the things that we did, like we had a lot of challenges going on with our implementation process. So we did a customer journey map, right? Here's our journey of the customer for this product's implementation. Here's another map of the journey for this other product. And then what I had the teams do is go in and take, sticky notes and put it on, where are you frustrated with the process? Where's the customer frustrated with the process? And then had them look at where it was, are there things that between the two product processes that would help one another? And are there things that we need to advocate to change within the product or within, the overall process? The result was a laundry list of things, and you can't do 100 changes because there are some CEOs who think you can, but it's not going to work. So I say like, okay, what's reasonable? Let's pick the top 5. Now, how are we going to pick? Not everybody's choice is going to get picked, but because each person in the team had a voice in what we selected to promote as our top 5, even when theirs wasn't chosen, they were happy to go along with it because they were seen, they were heard, and they knew they mattered because they got a vote.
That makes sense. I guess the question that I would have in the back is, how do you kind of instill that? What do you need to do to enable that, where they actually feel that way? What's the kind of the modeling process, the example that you as a leader can set to kind of say, this is serious. We're not just lip service. This really means something.
Right. Yeah, and that's why I put it in the chat. My favorite, how do you do a change, is psychological safety, right? And there are 3 things that you need, to create psychological safety. 1, model vulnerability. 2, be curious. And 3, reward candor. I see you writing down. You want me to repeat them, Dan?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Please.
Model vulnerability. Be curious.
I'm vulnerable right now, by the way. So there we go.
And then reward candor. And when I talk about model vulnerability, that's where you as the leader, you need to go first. And you need to show that it's okay to be wrong. It's okay to ask questions. And it's okay to have failed. I like to tell the story about when I failed analytical chemistry. I was going to be a chemist when I grew up. Since grade 8, I was going to be a chemist. And I'm in university, I'm taking analytical chemistry. I walk into the exam and I'm like, did I take this class? What is this on the exam? That was the end of my chemistry degree. It brought me to technology, and that's why I'm here. But I like to show like, hey, you don't know everything. And I'll also share, even in business as a leader, I one time had to shut down the company that I was running because we couldn't get the revenue model right and our investors were tired. So I had, I held a funeral for the company, and we ended it with, what did we learn? Like, we built fantastic software, but we couldn't get, the money to flow in the way that we needed it to. So it wasn't that the people were wrong, it turns out that our timing was off. We were too far ahead of the curve. 3 years later, another company made it work. Mm.
Mm.
But, you know, the point there is to say you want to model that vulnerability of I've been wrong. I've been in situations where things didn't work, but it didn't make me any less of a good person. It didn't make me, you know, not have value for the ideas that I bring to the table and the service that I provide. And then you want to be curious. And my favorite question I like to ask is, what do you need? Right? And then one of my directors said, "Oh, what do you need to make this outcome possible?" I thought that was a nice, good twist, right? When you think about what are, you know, whether it's your KPIs that you're doing or the company's initiatives for the year, what do you need for this to be possible? And then you want to listen really carefully and not fix it immediately, right? The first thing you want, because that's when you move to number 3, is you want to reward candor. Thank you for sharing with me that that's what you need. Let me think about it and see if I have more questions or what I can come back and do. Because that's when you're showing, you know, if you just like right away, you're like, well, did you really care? But to show somebody that they matter, they need to see that you take time to be thoughtful about what it is they just shared with you. Now, if you can fix
So
it right away, do it after that period of time. And if you can't, come back and model vulnerability.
So repeat the process.
Repeat the
I think
process.
that's what I'm hearing from you. It's not just a one time, because that's where people think it's the lip service. But if it's a continuous process again and again, then that moves into what I think what you're calling the psychological safety piece.
Right. It's that consistency, right, of repeating those 3 over and over again so that people do feel like you see them, you hear them, and that they matter because you're taking time to think about what it is they told you. You're thanking them for having been brave enough to tell you something that maybe you didn't really want to hear.
Yeah, I mean, I put it back in my thing in the chat. I said, communication consensus across the team. When I don't feel like I'm being heard, right, and I don't feel like they care what I'm saying about it, that's my checkout point. Like, okay, it's your change, not my change. All right,
Well,
so
right.
let
And
me
so
make
you're
sure.
not going to come back with other ideas at that
No.
point, too, right? To me, when you can do this consistently, the new ideas that come out are amazing. The energy level of your team is higher and their resilience is better. So when things don't work, they adapt as opposed to just, well, it's not going to work, right? You know, it's like, oh, well,
Here
that
we go
didn't work.
again.
What can we do next? It's a different energy. And that's what I found for the initiatives that were successful, that got us into that 30%. That's what we had done.
All right, that's a great starting point. So what I wrote down before was modeling vulnerability, being curious, and rewarding candor. That's the first step. If I want more, where do I go to for more? Because
Well,
this is
we are
clearly,
out of
it's not
time
just those
because
things.
Paul's got questions and needs us to go to the breakout.
Right.
One of the things that I actually did over last year is I spent a lot of time analyzing what did I learn the hard way over my career. And so I wrote a book. And if you would like to learn more about what I did, hold on, I can do this. Just my background. Ta-da! There's my book. So this is my book. Whoop, this side, right?
Yeah, there you
You
go.
can
There you
find
go.
it on my website, traceyvirtue.com. And it's a book of stories, like the story that I just told, right? You know, there's 24 stories in the book. And each time I give you a set of, well, what did I learn the hard way through this story? So you see characters go through an experience, like I just told you about the journey maps, and they discover what it is that you need as a leader. So they're really fast, takes you like 15 minutes to read a chapter. And then I give you some tips. How do you put this into action yourself? And so if you're interested in more things that I learned over my 30-year career, there it is.
So in the conversation that you and I've had, I like the pragmatism. I had that old business school prof who always said, theory is great, but what are you going to do Monday morning, 8 o'clock? And I could never have a good answer. I think that you'd have a good answer. So that's the conversation that we've been having. I hope that's of value to others as well. Paul, I want to turn back to you and let you kind of pick up the next pieces. But hopefully that was of value. I know I have to write things down every time. It helps. I'm keeping this piece of paper. Thanks, Tracey.
Thank you, Paul.
That was
Thanks,
great.
Dan.
So again, everyone, sign language applause. Thank you so much for the share. We've got our brains spinning. You certainly have mine spinning. I think everything you shared is so key. And Tracey, I loved that you led with vulnerability too, where you're saying, my honest answer was no. And I think honestly, it's easy for us as leaders to feel that way because we're trying to steer this boat. We often feel like we know what's best. And so getting people to feel seen, heard, and respected is definitely something that is a key component. And a lot of that I think is spoken to in what everyone shared here.